and growing gap between the funds required and the funds available for humanitarian response is a major factor behind the exclusion of the world's most vulnerable people. Humanitarians, local or international, may know the needs but not have the funds and other capacities to meet them. Out of scope, many of the world's most vulnerable people do not receive support from the humanitarian sector because their needs or crises do not fit into traditional areas of concern of the humanitarian sector. Next slide, please. Rights basis for disability inclusive DRR. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction uses a people-centered approach, putting people, their lives, livelihoods, and health first, defining assets broader in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. It is talking about people disproportionately at risk. Depending on the context and situation, these are poor people, children, older persons, ethnic, cultural, or religious minorities, and persons with disabilities. The Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is comprehensive in different ways. There is a global shift from the old individual and charity model of disability to the social model. The understanding of and the action taken on disability issues has changed from considering persons with disabilities as objects of pity to persons with human rights. Article 3, General Principles. This is new to a core human rights treaty, interconnected between each other and to every provision of the Convention. Respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices, and independence of persons. Autonomy is understood as self-determination. Non-discrimination. Full and effective participation and inclusion in society. Respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. Shift to human rights approach. Equality of opportunity, equal rights, which implies that the needs of each and every individual are of equal importance, that those needs must be made the basis for the planning of societies, and that all resources must be employed in such a way as to ensure that every individual has equal opportunity for participation. Accessibility, highlighting the multiple dimensions of accessibility, including the removal of physical, communication, intellectual, and social barriers. Equality between men and women. Respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities, and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve their identities. Evolving capacities, signaling that in the absence of such a principle, children would be excluded from protection because they do not have legal capacity and thus autonomy until a certain age. Of course, we also do have Article 11 and 32. They are legally binding for states, but also serves as guideline for persons with disabilities and for NGOs if they want to take their responsibility seriously on leaving no one behind. The Agenda 2030 brings it all together and is as well an inclusive framework. It links with Sendai and with CRPD and shows to what extent we need a comprehensive approach to solve the problems we face. For example, accessible and safe learning environment for cities and communities.
Thank you very much. So I will continue with other guidelines and frameworks you might already know. Please, can I ask you, who of you already knows about humanitarian inclusion standards? you can use your hand on. Yes, thank you. There is already one person using the hand in your chat box on your right hand side, or you can write in the chat box if you already know the humanitarian standard is a partner standard, and it gives you it's more on humanitarian action than on DRR, but what is very useful is there is a toolkit which I uploaded to the training material. You can access it, and then there is another guideline from the IASC, from the Interagency Standing Committee, a very useful guideline which you can as well find in the training material. It's a very practical, a hands-on tool. So please see all these resources and use them. They are made with people, with persons with disabilities. And they are very inclusive and very comprehensive. Talking about inclusive data, I want just to shed some light on the Washington Group questions without going too much into the details. We have one colleague who commented on Padlet that he was using the Washington Group questions. Is this person with us now? Because he or she said that he used or she used the Washington Group questions in Nepal, and they are using it for their own assessment, if I understand that correctly, but as well with the government survey. So in short, the questions are, I don't see that no one's reaction, so the person might not be here now. The Washington Group questions, it's the short set of questions. It's about 6 questions, so it's very simple. It's designed to be used in various kinds of situations, to survey, to evaluate programs, but also to do the baselines and the analysis. And the basic is that these 6 questions, they aim on seeing, on hearing, on the physical condition, so walking, climbing, on concentrating and remembering, and on then the 5th question on self-care, and then on language. So it's a combination of sensory questions about the condition with regard to the sensory abilities of the person, but as well questions designed to know more about the interaction between the person and the environment. So about language, about remembering, and then the entire self-care question, which you can see here. So the Washington Group questions, they are very useful. You can find the more information on the Washington Group website, but also there is a good a dedicated website with humanity and inclusion, and there are some toolkits as well. So the link is, again, you can find the link in your training material. So if you want to go, if you want to have more in-depth information about the Washington Group questions, which can be very useful for your analysis, for example, then please refer to these websites, or post your question on Padlet, and we try to exchange experiences there. So we'll go on with disability inclusive staircase model. Eva will tell you a bit more about this. Before then, we go to the interview with our colleague Shilpi and Iqbal. So Eva, can you take over, please?
Yeah, this is the disability inclusive staircase model with the different phases of disaster risk management. In the middle, you can see the DRR activities, which you probably all know. And on the right side, you have additional inputs to make these activities inclusive. So, for example, before an event happens, when you do risk mapping, you have to ensure to have equal representation, so to have persons with disability on board as well. Or in the early warning systems, you have to make sure that you have accessible early warning systems, and you have accessible transport, camps, shelters, child spaces, and the trainings are accessible to persons with disabilities as well. Or at the end, after an event happens, you should make sure, again, that you have equal representation, that you have specific risk categories inside your planning, that you have data disaggregation and identification of persons with disabilities, and that you use universal design. So this is just a short overview in order to see for you which activities you can make more inclusive, not to forget persons with disabilities. And these are some examples of disability inclusive disaster risk reduction in Bangladesh. These are examples out of the field of Gaibandha, where you, for example, have DPO formation, you have trainings, we had awareness raising, you see an evacuation boat which is accessible, you see early warning systems with the flag, so visible for everybody. And yes, I would like now to leave the floor to the interview with my colleague Shilpi in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. So I just see that it was offline again, and Shilpi. And yes, Rifata, can you tell us more about the connection?
Suddenly they lost their connection. They're trying to reconnect. So in the meantime, so we can share the story of the Shilpi Begum with the audience so they can read. So in the meantime, they are trying to reconnect again.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. So we will try to get them back on board. Maybe Rifata, can you tell us, can you give us a short overview of the disaster management committees in Bangladesh, how they are designed, and why persons with disabilities are part of these committees? In the meantime, can you give us an input on that?
Thank you, Dennis. In Bangladesh, from the national level to the local level, all the disaster management committee is interlinked with each other. So our government set up this link within this intergovernmental agencies to make the efficient initiative for the disaster risk reduction. So in the rural area, in the local government area, most of the local government organized 2 or 3 types of committees, and it started from Upojala level, Upojala Disaster Risk Reduction, and then union level, Union Disaster Risk Reduction Committee, and then Ward Disaster Management Committee. So that was the last tier of the Bangladesh local government. So it is very new addition towards the local government. Before that, it wasn't included to the local government team. But now it realized that we have lots of villages, and we need one committee, ward level, that connected to be the Union Disaster Management Committee and Upazila Disaster Management Committee. So whenever we are trying to implement our project and trying to initiate implementation projects related to disability inclusive DRR, and we realize that the persons with disabilities, their legs behind. In that sense, when we are trying to sensitize local government, that time it is realized by the Union Disaster Management Committee, so that there might be one representative from the persons with disabilities, so they can represent themselves and they can raise their voice and talk about their needs and what is the barriers they're facing during the disaster and post disaster. So in the meantime, from the local level, our national level government also sent a circular that persons with disability representative needs to be included to the all disaster management committees. But sometimes it's seen that they forget about to implement this circular, and from our project and from the local level, we always try to remind them this is the circular and you have to include persons with disabilities. So these committees to make sure that your initiative will be inclusive.
Okay, thank you. So that's that was the introduction, and now we still don't have the colleagues online, but we will change the agenda now. So your own view of I will Rifata, I will ask you some questions so that we can have a better understanding of it. So or do you need to be in contact with Iqbal, Rifata? Sorry, we just need to arrange ad hoc now. So we just need to have a short bilateral coordination. So Rifata, can you tell me if you can answer questions or if you need your own attention on getting Iqbal and Shilpi back online?
Yes, I need some time, little bit 2 minutes to connect with Iqbal Bhai so that he can come, because it's already started. So give me 2 minutes, then I will be coming back to you.
Thank you. So I will continue with the story of Shilpi, which we shared beforehand, and I also see that there is another question, which is great because now we have the time to go for these questions as well. So can I ask you, Verena, to open your mic and just ask your question to everyone so that we can start discussing? So until we have everything ready. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's a very general question. I was not sure when could I do it, so I thought it's quite the moment. We are discussing a lot about how to disaggregate data we collect. And of course, gender is one aspect, but when it comes to disability, yeah, we are not very sure if we should just have one category disability, or do you differentiate different forms, categories of disability, or how do you do it? That is my general question. And how do you monitor it?
Okay, thank you. In general, is anyone having from the participants? Does anyone have experience in that from the participants and wants to answer the question or give some input on it? Okay, so I will try to answer your question. So what is suggested by different bodies and the Washington Group is to not only have one dimension, so disability, yes, no, because especially when we are talking about intersectionality, for example, this would not reflect the reality, and we cannot read enough information out of it. So, but it is a challenge, a much discussed challenge, which we have pretty everywhere. If you want to capture the entire aspects, you can not only ask disability yes or no, because of what. So the first thing is intersectionality, which I just mentioned. There are different dimensions in an individual's life with which you have barriers. So, and then the other thing is disability sometimes is the consideration of the person, him or herself, might be different than your consideration. So if you ask, and this depends on the cultural context as well, if you ask someone, do you have a disability, you might not receive the answer you're looking for, because someone does not consider him or herself as a person with disabilities, and another with the same condition, the same individual needs, probably would answer the same questions with no or yes, or vice versa. And then another point is that the person, it depends, the disability as the disability as such depends as well on the environment and the environmental barriers. It depends as well on where the person is. So I can give you an example from a colleague who is blind, and he says, I don't feel like a person with disability when I'm in my hometown. So I can navigate wherever I want to go, but as soon as I'm in a different environment, I feel the disability because there is a lack of information, there's a lack of guidance. So it depends on the environment very much. And so to give you to come back to the Washington Group questions, and I just need to reopen the slides again. There we are. Just give me 1 second, please. So the Washington Group questions, which would be the preferred set of questions, ask for different aspects of disability, and that would be very much the way which is supported as well by the disability movement to use these questions and to disaggregate in this regard with regard to disabilities. Does this answer your question, or do you want more information on disaggregation on other aspects than disabilities?
No, it's okay. Thank you. You know, I know the Washington questions, and I think we can do the survey or ask these questions. But for the use in the PCM, sometimes we cannot make 5 categories. So it's a little bit complicated, but I completely understood what he was explaining.
Just a short.
Excuse me. Yeah, excuse me. You know, we are working with partner organizations in the countries, and sometimes they already have difficulties to collect data and disaggregate by gender or so. So if it comes to disability, it's even more complicated to really have it in the monitoring system. But it's okay, thank you.
What you can do, or what you can do with these questions. So if you cannot, let's say, mainstream them into your own monitoring system, or like do a baselines, is that you just pick, let's say, one day in your program, or if you just capture a small area and then do in-depth interviews with the Washington group of questions in this small area, geographic area, or it can be time-wise, and then you have a smaller sample, but you can then have more in-depth information if you cannot mainstream these 4 or 6 questions into your monitoring system. Which is very reasonable, and we all have these challenges, especially when we yeah, in the field. That's definitely the case. But so limit it to, maybe that could be a solution, to limit it to a small amount of time, or to a small geographic area, and then use the data from there. Maybe that can be a workaround. And just as a bracket, that's the reason why advocacy is so important in parallel to the program work, so that we have a better understanding of disaggregated data, or that we have a better understanding of the realities, that everyone is aware of the need of it. And then I would just quickly answer the question from Rajesh, related to the translation, to the sign language translation, which is very reasonable comment. So what we have done is that we have asked beforehand during the registration process who needs reasonable explanation for the webinar, if there would have been someone who would need sign language interpretation, we would have provided this. But yes, that's very true, and often this is forgotten. Yeah. Do you want to add something to that, Rajesh? Yes, please.
Hello, Dennis, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Raj from Nepal, and I'm working in the area of disability inclusive disaster risk reduction for more than 12 years. And I just got the link in my messenger, and I joined this training. It was a good opportunity for me. I had put the comment because as UNCRPT said that information should be accessible. Everyone should, if we can, at least we have to make, we have to ensure that everyone who comes under the category of disability, at least we can provide the accessible information, such as in DRR we are practicing in Nepal, we are using Braille, we are using sign language interpreters while we provide the trainings. Just we talked about the disaster risk reduction measures, just like we are using, if we are using the risk mapping, we call it in Nepal vulnerability capacity assessment. There we also use the play cards, colored play cards, and just like the sign language interpreter, because most importantly, persons with disabilities are not consulted and their problems are not being addressed. So in this training, I just suggested that it would be good if we could have managed one sign language interpreter, because I don't know whether there are many participants have visual impairments, so it would be good. Yeah. So then this was my short comment. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask you back? Would you like to share more of your experience when we talk about participation and how this works? So how did you first, how did you identify your partners and your colleagues with disabilities to work with you, and how does this collaboration work? So you mentioned this reasonable accommodation. What is the specific measure you take to take into consideration these reasonable accommodations?
Yeah, sure, Dennis. Yeah, so in Nepal, first of all, when we start working in the disability inclusive disaster risk reactions at local level, district levels, as I already heard, the composition of disaster risk reaction and management in Bangladesh, likewise the same, it is also in Nepal. We have our union government and then provincial government, and after then we have ward governments. And at that time, first of all, we coordinate and collaborate with disabled people organization. We have our organization in all districts, all regions of Nepal, and while conducting any kind of trainings, while conducting sharing any information, first of all, coordination with disabled people organization is being done. Once we get the actual information from DPOs, and at that time we become sure that some kind of participants we have, like there will be 25 visual impairments, visual impairments in the training, and like that we manage the accommodation and information in coordination with the DPOs. Likewise, if there are any person with physical disabilities, and then we manage some kind of training, we go to the community ourselves, we go to the area where they are living, just like they can cross the river and they cannot, the bridges which are not accessible. And so, and after that, we have one major agency called Local Disaster and Climate Resilient Committee, which is in local level, and there is also one women and children section, which overall sees the agendas and matters related to persons with disability, and we coordinate with that section of government of Nepal, and following those their instructions and other things which are necessary for since in our country there are 10 types of categories for persons with disabilities, except using the Washington group of short set of questions, there are 10 types of persons with disability categories, and as for we try to manage our resources. But most importantly, I already said that coordination with DPOs and then getting their pre-consensus, coordination with the local disaster and climate resilient committee, ward disaster and climate resilient committee, and even in the community level, there is a community disaster and climate resilient committee where the representation of persons with disabilities are ensured. Until or unless we did not get pre-consensus from the community disaster and climate resilient committee, that your training, your risk mapping, your early warning system, your community simulation and drills are not going to be inclusive, including persons with disability and children with disability. We would not be able to conduct that any kind of activity. They gave their prior approval that yeah, your content is right, you have the sign language interpreters, you have used the color placards and which are visible, and you have you have chosen the places accessible for all, and such kind of criteria are being discussed before the meeting, before the training, before doing any kind of meeting with government. And once we finalize that, yeah, at least 95% our checklist have been corrected. We have our inclusive audit, just like, yeah, we have our sign interpreters. We have 20 participants as persons with disabilities. Among them, there are 10 persons with visual impairment. And there is 5 physical disability, and such kind of criteria are being checked and discussed with the DPOs and even the community level disaster and climate resident committee organization and government. And after finalized, we conduct and we manage all those things. Yeah, that's all. Dennis, yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. So I heard about reasonable accommodation in budgeting. You need to have the resources to provide this reasonable accommodation. I heard that you have national policies that you are following. That's very important. Again, with regard to advocacy, you have contacts to DPOs, established contacts that you can use. So participation of persons with disabilities is ensured in your activities. So that's you said that I heard that you're using the Washington group questions already. So that's yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing your experience.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. I see that there is a hand. From a colleague from Madagascar. Is there another question? Otherwise, I would go back to the interview with Shilpi. Is there another question from a colleague from Madagascar? From Yvonne? Okay, so I would go on. Otherwise, you can still post your question in the chat box. So I would like to take it from here and go back to the case of Bangladesh. They are still struggling with the technique, but we have a plan B, and we prepared some questions which I would like to share with you. We have been asking Shilpi beforehand, and I can switch on my camera if you want. So these questions we have discussed already beforehand. And I want to share with you what she told us already, and it's about the change that had happened until the past years, and until persons with disabilities are part of these UDMCs, these disaster management committees. So Shilpi then answered that the participation brings a significant change regarding the IDRR, like disability-friendly weather forecasting. So given the priority to take shelter homes as per early prepared list of persons with disabilities, so that they can go earlier than others, because they might need more time to move, especially severe disabled women and children, as well as other disabled people. That they ensured that their shelter homes are accessible for those. So that's one of the significant changes that she mentioned. So weather forecasting and the shelters. Then another point is that the government service providers that they are now aware of these specific measures to take. So, and then again, we are talking about accessibility, so physical accessibility, for example, but as well like early warning system to take into consideration that you might need more time, for example. Communication is very important, she mentioned, and so she says to save lives of hearing and visually impaired persons, the UDMC take care to be aware of their family members, so the caretakers, so that everyone has his responsibilities that's written in a plan. So who is responsible for which person, and to alert which person, and then that this is followed up. So that's a significant change which happened in her area. And then, yeah, we are still waiting. So I will continue with what she said. And we asked, we were talking about gender aspects in the management plans. So how did you integrate gender aspects in your management plan? And that she said that they integrated gender aspects into the DRR management plans. So they have a safeguarding policy which is included and which is discussed during their meetings. And this includes not only women but girls and adolescent, yeah, and women with disability, so that they have that there is a safe space as well, and that they can be protected from sexual harassment during these during disasters. They also have a plan to take special care of pregnant women and lactating mothers while they are migrating to the shelters. So there are women's only. Yeah, no, that's yeah. So they have, when they migrate to their shelter, that they are protected, that they have a place to go, and then that they have a person, a specific person, which where they can get all the information for them. And they also included their women and mothers in their committee. And I'm now welcoming Iqbal and Shilpi again, and thank you very much for joining us again.
I'm very sorry, Danish, for disruption.
No problem. Yes,
okay, please start.
That's great. I can hear you, and we all see you. So thank you very much. So can I please ask everyone to post their questions in the chat box if they have questions. Otherwise, we would continue with the interview as with the questions that we have prepared. So we would like to know. I was talking about the change over the past years since the disaster management committees are inclusive. So, Shilpi, can you please tell us about the functioning and about your meetings and how this works? Can you tell us a bit about the functioning?
বলেন আপনি একটু ইউডিএমসি ফাংশনগুলো একটু কাইন্ডলি বলেন।
দুর্যোগ ঝুঁকি কমানোর পরিকল্পনা ও আপৎকালীন পরিকল্পনা বাস্তবায়ন।
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. দুর্যোগ ঝুঁকি কমানোর পরিকল্পনা ও আপৎকালীন পরিকল্পনা বাস্তবায়ন।
Wait. She tell us disaster risk reduction contingency planning and implementation. তারপর বলেন।
Yes.
আগাম সংকেত প্রচারণা, দুর্যোগ ও পূর্ব প্রস্তুতি ও সাড়া প্রদান।
She tell us early warning dissemination and response to disaster preparedness.
দুর্যোগকালীন স্থানীয় মানুষদের আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রে স্থানান্তর।
Shifting people to shelter at the time of disaster.
দুর্যোগকালীন ও দুর্যোগ পরবর্তী সাড়া প্রদান।
Response during and post disaster.
পুনর্বাসন ও নির্মাণ সংক্রান্ত সাড়া প্রদান।
Response on rehabilitations and construction.
May I jump? May I jump, Iqbal bhai?
Please.
Yes. So it will be good if you can explain that how Union Disaster Management Committee coordinate and function. So I know that you are mentioning about the activities that Union Disaster Management Committee always do, but how they do these activities, you can tell with the example of any disaster.
Oh, I see. This also is a function also of UDMC. Okay, so you want to say example. আপনি একটা example বলেন যে disaster management এর সময় কি করেছিল, এরকম একটা বলেন যে কোন সময় লাস্ট কোন দুর্যোগের সময় কি হয়েছিল সেটা।
হ্যাঁ, আমরা যে আমপানের সময় জরুরি মিটিং এ বসেছি।
তারপর বলেন প্লিজ।
হ্যাঁ, জরুরি মিটিং এ বসেছি এবং আমরা
প্রথম থেকে বলেন।
প্রথম থেকে স্টেপ বাই স্টেপ যদি মনে করেন যে আমফান প্রজেক্টে আমফানের সাইক্লোনের সময় আপনারা প্রথম থেকে কিভাবে কাজ শুরু করলেন এবং ইউনিয়ন ডিজাস্টার ম্যানেজমেন্ট কমিটি কিভাবে আসলে কাজগুলা কোঅর্ডিনেট করছে বা শুরু করেছে, আপনারা কিভাবে ইনভলভ হলেন, এটা একটা জাস্ট শর্ট ফর্মে একটু যদি বলেন, ইকবাল ভাই যদি সাথে ট্রান্সলেট করেন।
জি জি আপনি একটু আপনার মানে ওই সময় শুরু থেকে একটু সংক্ষেপে আপনি বলুন।
আমরা প্রথমে আমপান যখন আসবে তখন সংকেতগুলো আসতেছিল, তাই না? তো আমরা কমিটি আমরা মিটিং বসেছি এবং সেটা এলাকার প্রচারণা করেছি এবং এই কি বলে যে কাজ করতে আমাদের যে দিছিল
আপনারা প্রথমে তো মিটিং এ বসছিলেন, মিটিং এ বসার পর তারপর মানুষগুলোকে আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রে নেওয়ার জন্য কাজ প্ল্যান করছেন।
হ্যাঁ, যে আগে সিগন্যালগুলো দিয়েছি, সিগন্যালগুলো দিয়েছি এবং আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রে মানুষগুলো নেওয়ার জন্য কোথায় কোথায় ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ মানুষগুলো আছে, প্রতিবন্ধী, তারপরে গর্ভবতী, বৃদ্ধ, এগুলো আমাদের ইউনিয়ন পরিষদ আগে ছিল এজেন্সিতে মানে তালিকাভুক্ত আছে। তো সেখান থেকে আমরা সেগুলো আগে নক করে রাখছি যে তাদেরকে আগে আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রে নেওয়া হবে এবং আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রের চাবি কোথায় আছে এবং সেটা পরিষ্কার পরিচ্ছন্ন করা আগেই রেডি রাখা। তো আমরা এগুলো আসলে করেছি।
Okay, thank you very much, Shilpi Appa. Shilpi tell us that during Amphan, say Union Disaster Management Committee seated in a meeting, and seated in a meeting that Union Parishad office to discuss situation about cyclone Amphan situation and the next course of action. So they firstly they find out this there is vulnerable peoples where lives in unions, and as per preserved list in Union Parishad, as per list they also firstly they coordinating with CPP to ensure signal flags in the unions various places, and as per list they have been shifting the vulnerable peoples, especially persons with disability and pregnant women with disability, to nearest shelter centers.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you, sir. Yes, thank you very much. So what I heard is that it's about mapping, for example, the shelters and the homes, and it's about communication plans that you are mentioning, so that they are involved. And I shortly touched the question of gender beforehand while you were reconnecting. Can we please have, can you please share your experience, what it means, or how you consider the aspects of women and with regard to your work? So how do you work together with different persons, different women? Do you have interviews with them? How do you get to know them? Pregnant women, for example, how do you identify pregnant women? Do you have specific shelters? Yeah.
মানে জানতে চেয়েছে যে আপনারা এই গর্ভবতী নারীদের যে কিভাবে মানে চিহ্নিত করলেন যারা কোথায় কোথায় আছে, সেটা কিভাবে, সেটা কি আপনাদের থাকা তালিকা অনুযায়ী আগে থেকে করেছেন?
হ্যাঁ, আমরা আগে থেকে সেই তালিকাটা আমাদের কাছে আছে। আমি যেহেতু ইউনিয়ন পরিষদের মেম্বার হিসেবে আমরা জানি যে কোথায় কোথায় গর্ভবতী মহিলা আছে এবং আমাদের কাছে আগে থেকে তালিকা আছে। তো সেই হিসেবে আমরা জানতে পারি, এবং আমাদের এখানে যে আছে কমিউনিটি ক্লিনিক আছে, সেখান থেকে জানতে পারি কতজন ওয়ার্ডে কতজন গর্ভবতী মহিলা আছে, তো সেখান থেকে নিয়ে আমরা সেটা করি।
Okay. Okay. You know, Shilpi tell us is the Union Parishad has, or Union Parishad, the UDMC has a list of total people population of this union, and the collectors pregnant women list from the Union Community Clinic. So who and where are the pregnant women?
Yeah. Okay. So is this list is, sorry, did I get that correct? That your list, you can get this list from government statistics, or I mean regional or local government statistic that you can be provided.
এটা কি তালিকাটা কি আপনারা করেছিলেন নাকি সরকারি তালিকা নাকি এটা?
এটা আমরা এই জন্য রাখি যে প্রেগন্যান্সিতে ভাতা আসে।
তালিকাটা কি করলেন, কিভাবে পাইছেন?
তালিকাটা আমরা ওই যে এখন বর্তমানে যে একটা এনজিও কাজ করে, মানে ওয়ার্ডে ওয়ার্ডে একটা মানে লোক নেওয়া হয়েছে ওদেরকে শুধু ওই গর্ভবতীদের সেবা দেওয়ার জন্য। ওদের কাছে ওই তালিকাটা ফুল আছে, ওদের সাথে যোগাযোগ করলে ওয়ার্ডে কোন জায়গায় গর্ভবতী আছে তো ওরাই বলে দেয়। যে একটা কেয়ার অন বাংলাদেশ, যে একজন করে এবার যে হ্যাঁ হেলথ কেয়ারের লোক, হেলথ কেয়ার থেকে একজন করে ওয়ার্ডে শুধু মানে কাজ করতে 800 টাকা বেতনে যারা কাজ করেছে, সেখান থেকে আমরা ওটা ফুললি পেয়ে যাই। শুধু ফোন দিলে ওটা তারা বলে যে এই ওয়ার্ডে এক একটা ওয়ার্ডে এক একজন লোক আছে।
আচ্ছা, ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ। সেটাই লাস্ট দ্যাট যে in each union of Kolapara Upazila has a health service provider organization who have union's total pregnant women list, and they get it from there, and depending the list, they have been identified where and how many pregnant mothers in unions. And so each union council ward members also knows well known about population situation, like especially adolescent, as a pregnant mother, especially disabled men and women's number.
Okay, thank you. Do you work with focal points? So is there a designated focal point where the population can refer to if they have a general question to disaster preparedness? How do you ensure communication? How do you ensure that everyone can get your information?
আপনারা কিভাবে কমিউনিকেশন গুলো করেন? হ্যাঁ, যোগাযোগগুলো কিভাবে করেন এই ডিজাস্টারের সময়?
মোবাইলে ফোনে বা যে কাছাকাছি গুলো যে তারপর সিপিপি ভলান্টিয়ারের মাধ্যমে।
Danish, excuse me, do you want to know so how did the communications with service providers?
Yes, the information about the shelter, for example, the where to go people, so the focal point. How does the community know about what they are talking in the committee?
মানে আপনারা কিভাবে মানুষদেরকে জানান কেন্দ্রে যাওয়ার বিষয়গুলো, এই ইনফরমেশনগুলো, তথ্যগুলো কিভাবে দিয়েছেন?
কমিটিতে যখন ডিসকাশন হয়, কোনো ডিসিশন হয়, সেই ডিসিশন গুলা আপনারা কিভাবে জানান পরবর্তীতে অন্য মানুষজনকে? কমিটিতে যখন আপনারা মিটিং এ করেন তখন কিছু ডিসিশন হয়, ওখানে কিছু সিদ্ধান্ত হয়, কিছু ইনফরমেশন হয়, এই ইনফরমেশন যায় কিভাবে কমিউনিটিতে, কিভাবে যায় পরবর্তীতে?
কিভাবে যাচ্ছে আপনাদের ফিল্ডে, কিভাবে যাচ্ছে মাঠে?
আমি যদি দুর্যোগের বিষয়ে বলি, সেটা তো একটা হচ্ছে পতাকা উঠানো হচ্ছে, দ্বিতীয় হচ্ছে যে মাইকিং হচ্ছে, মসজিদে মাইকিং হচ্ছে, প্রত্যেকটা মসজিদে আমরা লিফলেট দিয়ে দিচ্ছি। এখন এত নম্বর সিগন্যাল হচ্ছে যে আপনারা আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রে যান। তো আপনার সিপিপি ভলান্টিয়ার মাইকিং করতেছে, একটা তো দল আছে, একটা ওয়ার্ডে সিপিপি ভলান্টিয়ার একটা দল আছে। তো সেখানে আমরা ওই তথ্যগুলো পৌঁছে দিচ্ছি যে এখন এই করতে হবে, পুরো যে কাজগুলো করতেছে।
শুধু সিপিপি কাজ করতেছে,
আস্তে কিন্তু ব্যবস্থাপনা কমিটি কাজ করতেছে, বিভিন্ন কমিটিতে আমরা পৌঁছে দেওয়া হচ্ছে।
শুনতে পাচ্ছেন?
হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি। So you can translate. I will complement.
Okay. So sharing information of UDMCs through awareness campaign, and also through the volunteers, CPP volunteers and Red Cross volunteers, and also through is the cyclone shelter management committee.
So I want to complement a little bit because there's a lots of participants from the other countries, so they don't know about the procedure of Bangladesh early warning system. So we always maintain a flagging system for the early warning. Whenever any urgency or emergencies coming, so CPP volunteer, it's CPP Cyclone Preparedness Program. It's a Bangladesh national one committee for volunteer for the cyclone response. So they are the main actor for disseminating this early warning, and they are also member of this Union Disaster Management Committee. So when the Union Disaster Management Committee calls for the emergency meeting, then all the members accommodated together, and then they take decision when they will be disseminating this flag or this information. So through this CPP volunteer, when they raise this flag, people can understand that there is emergency coming, and they can understand what is the level of the danger. So with the raised flag, then they can understand. And there also another section, the CPP volunteer, they do miking. So whenever any persons with disabilities who cannot hear, they can see the flag, but any persons who cannot hear, they can get the information from the neighbor or the family member. And Bangladesh government also introduced a mobile online platform. It's a 166 something number, so people knows about this information, they dial this number and they can immediately get the weather bulletin and the signaling and everything.
Yeah, thank you. Then there is another question from the chat box about the disaster preparedness plan, how to identify again elderly people, persons with disabilities, pregnant women, children below 5 years. So how do you make these preparedness plans, and how do you make them inclusive of different types of vulnerabilities in order to leave no one behind? Again, you already informed us about about the statistics that you can get from government. Is there anything to add, or is there, regarding the disaster preparedness plan that you're now, that you are doing?
আপনাদের যে দুর্যোগ ব্যবস্থাপনা পরিকল্পনা আছে সেই পরিকল্পনাকে আপনারা কিভাবে মানে ইনক্লুসিভ করেছেন, মানে সকলকে নিয়ে কিভাবে করেছেন, কিভাবে তৈরি করেছেন এবং এই পরিসংখ্যানটা কিভাবে তার করেছেন?
তো মিটিংয়ের মাধ্যমে, আলোচনার মাধ্যমে, তাই না? সহযোগিতায়
ফ্রিলি বলেন, মানে ইজিলি বলেন, মানে আপনার যা জানা আছে সেটাই বলেন।
হ্যাঁ, আমরা
মানে আপনাদের যে ইউডিএমসির যে দুর্যোগ ব্যবস্থাপনা পরিকল্পনা, সেই পরিকল্পনাকে কিভাবে ইনক্লুসিভ বা একীভূত করা হয়েছে?
এটা একীভূত করা হয়েছে আমাদের সবার সমন্বয়ে, সবার সাথে আলোচনা করে এবং
আচ্ছা, আমি শিল্পী আপাকে বুঝাই দেই। শিল্পী আপা, আপনারা যখন মিটিং করেন তো আপনাদের কি কোনো প্ল্যান আছে? ডিজাস্টার রিস্ক রিডাকশন কোনো প্ল্যান আছে? আপনাদের প্রিপেয়ারনেস কোনো প্ল্যান আছে?
কোনো পরিকল্পনা
আছে?
হ্যাঁ।
আচ্ছা, ওই পরিকল্পনার ভিতরে কি আপনারা কখনো প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষরা কোথায় কোন জায়গায় আছে ওরকম কোনো ম্যাপিং করছেন কখনো?
অবশ্যই হ্যাঁ, করেছি।
আপনাকে এভাবে জিজ্ঞেস করা হয়েছে যে আপনি যখন প্ল্যান করেন সেই প্ল্যানের ভিতরে প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষজন কোথায়, তাদের লিস্ট, ছোট বাচ্চা, প্রতিবন্ধী বাচ্চা আছে কিনা, তাদের লিস্ট, এল্ডারলি পিপল লিস্ট, এই জিনিসগুলা আপনারা প্ল্যানের মধ্যে কিভাবে অন্তর্ভুক্ত করেন? কিভাবে আপনারা পরিকল্পনাগুলো করেন, যে কিভাবে আপনাদের নিজেরা যখন বসেন সেটাই জিজ্ঞেস করছে, কিভাবে অন্তর্ভুক্ত করেন?
আমরা মিটিং এর সময় প্রত্যেকটা ওয়ার্ডের একটা ম্যাপ করি, হ্যাঁ, বা পুরো ইউনিয়নের আমাদের একটা ম্যাপ আছে, তো সেখানে কোন জায়গায় কোন প্রতিবন্ধী আছে, কোন জায়গায় ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ শিশু আছে, প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষ আছে, কোন জায়গায় বয়স্ক মানুষ আছে, এগুলো আমরা প্ল্যানের মাধ্যমে রাখি। সেই একটা আমাদের একটা প্ল্যান আছে, প্ল্যান তৈরি করেছি, সেখানে অবশ্যই
সেটা ওয়ার্ড ভিত্তিক।
হ্যাঁ, ওয়ার্ড ভিত্তিক, একদম পুরো ওয়ার্ড ভিত্তিক আছে।
ওকে, yes, Iqbal bhai, you can translate. I will compliment.
Okay, so we have a word-wise map. So in the maps we have allocated so where how many childs, normal childs or disabled childs, and pregnant mothers.
So I can elaborate a little bit. So Shilpi Appa was talking about that when they do meeting among themselves during the DPO's meeting or self-help group meetings, they always prepare a disaster preparedness plan. So when they prepare the plan, there are some action points they always mention about that. We have some action point to be implemented. So on that basis, they do some mapping. So they have a social map, ward basis. So in those maps, they identify the houses and location of the persons with disabilities, pregnant women, elderly people, and the children with disabilities. So in the so after that, when they develop this list, they try to communicate with the local government to match this list. Because sometimes it happens that they have a gap between their list and the local government list. So they always try to communicate and try to minimize the gap and try to use this finalized list for evacuation. So when there any signal is coming, they always try to follow this list, whether the location of the persons with disabilities and elderly people, pregnant women, they always try to evacuate them at first, priority basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is another question. Do you have specific material on inclusion in the early warning preparation framework? So do you have, so the question is in the chat box as well. You can find you can find the question in the chat box. Do you have specific materials on inclusion in the early warning preparation framework, especially aimed on elderly people, women who not use hotlines? So you were talking about the hotlines. So do you have other materials that you use in your early warning preparation framework?
বলছে আগাম সতর্ক ব্যবস্থা মানে সতর্ক সংকেত প্রচারের জন্য আপনাদের থেকে কোনো বিশেষ কোনো উপকরণ আছে?
হটলাইন নাম্বারে ফোন করি।
কোনো উপকরণ, বিশেষ কোনো উপকরণ ব্যবহার করা হয়?
শিল্পী আপা,
অবশ্যই
শিল্পী আপা, কোশ্চেনটা হলো যে যখন আগাম বার্তা দেন, আর্লি ওয়ার্নিং হয়, তখন ধরেন নর্মাল মানুষ যেভাবে শুনতে পায় হটলাইন দিয়ে, হ্যাঁ, ওরা জিজ্ঞেস করেছে ইনক্লুসিভ কোনো ম্যাটেরিয়াল, মানে আপনি যেখানে প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষজন আছে তাদের বিভিন্ন ধরন আছে, ওই অনুযায়ী আপনারা কোন ধরনের বিশেষ উপকরণ ব্যবহার করেন কিনা আগাম বার্তা দেওয়ার জন্য, যাতে সব ধরনের মানুষ আগাম বার্তাটা পায়। বুঝে গেছে?
পরিষ্কার। সেটা কিভাবে করে সেটা জানতে চাচ্ছি।
এখন আগাম বার্তা পায়
প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষ কিভাবে, আমি অপ্রতিবন্ধী আমি বললাম, কিন্তু একজন প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষের জন্য কি করছে?
এরকম তো ওরকম যে একেবারে যে আমি শুনতে পাই না, ওরকম মানুষের জন্য তার ফ্যামিলি তো এরকম বিশেষ কোনো ব্যবস্থা বা যন্ত্র নাই যে সে নিজেই শুনতে পায়, তার ফ্যামিলির মাধ্যমে, আশেপাশের মানুষের মাধ্যমে বোঝানো, ওরকম কোনো নাই যে তাদেরকে বোঝানোর মতো।
No, they have no special material, just sharing messages, early signal system by their family members and also volunteers.
Okay. You're working with the volunteers, and I guess that's very important, related to the question when it comes to older people, for example. For those who do not use hotlines, that these is it correct, my understanding, that these volunteers go door by door?
Yes, door by door.
Yes.
Patricia, is your question answered by this answer?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was asking a participant who posted the question, so I'm asking if this question is answered. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Dennis, I can add a little bit point, because the question is related that who don't use the hotline number, so how they can get the early warning signaling. So remember when I was talking about we have a dimension of early warning, it's like we raise flag, so who cannot hear, they can see the flag at the community level, so they always choose the very general kind of public place where people can see the flagging system, and then when they see the flag is raising, they can understand what is the number of the signaling, and then they have hotline number. If people cannot in community, every people use the basic kind of mobile, and it's a non-tariff hotline number, so it's like people do not have to spend any money to dial this hotline number. So it's non-tariff hotline number, people easily can use. It takes very less time. And also the CPP volunteer, they do miking door to door, and this is the way they're trying to disseminate this early warning at the community level.
Yes, thank you. So we come to the last questions. So the one question is what people with disabilities are doing during disasters. Do they go to the cyclone shelter? Do they go to the shelters? So I assume the question would be yes, but maybe you have a comment on that. Where do people with disabilities go during disasters?
শিল্পী আপা একটু ক্লিয়ার করে দিলে বিষয়টা। এই রিফাত আপা, শুনতে পাচ্ছেন?
একটু বলবেন যে ডিজাস্টার সময় প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষজনরা কোথায় যায়? ওরা কি সাইক্লোন শেল্টারে যায়? সেটাই জিজ্ঞেস করছে।
হ্যাঁ, ইয়েস।
কোথায় যায় ওরা?
হ্যাঁ, কাছাকাছি সাইক্লোন সেন্টারে না হলে যার খুব ভালো বাড়ি আছে, ঘর আছে, থাকে না এরকম, ওই স্থানে কাছাকাছি যে তার সাইকোলজি সেন্টারটা এবং ভালো একটা স্থানে তাদের নেওয়া হয়।
So Dennis, the answer is that there's a lots of cyclone shelter built by the government. So whenever any emergency comes, the persons with disabilities always go to the nearby cyclone shelters.
Yes, this is clear. So I think this question is answered too. So the reason why persons with disabilities are in these mainstream disaster management committees is that people with disabilities can go to these shelters, that these shelters are accessible, that the information is accessible. We talked about the information, that there is individual preparedness plans as well on local level, local, regional, national level, but also on household level in order to get everyone to the shelters. I think that's very clear. Then, so I would like to ask you the last question. We will come to an end. So we were talking about your advice to international NGOs, and you said one advice would be to build a contingency fund for disaster management committees to use these funds during disasters and have reasonable accommodation, for example. Is this still what one of your priority would be, kind of contingency funds to the disaster management committees, which could be supported by NGOs?
শিল্পী আপাকে জিজ্ঞেস করেছে যে লাস্ট যে কোশ্চেনটা ছিল আপনারা, আমরা যখন প্রিপারেশন করেছি যে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কমিউনিটিতে ওনার কি সাজেশন থাকতে পারে, সো ওই বিষয়ে জিজ্ঞেস করেছি। ওখানে কিছু প্রায়োরিটি আমরা বলেছিলাম কন্টিনজেন্সি ফান্ডের কথা, সো ওইটার বিষয়ে একটু যদি উনি বলে এলাবোরেটলি।
মানে আপনি মানে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল এনজিও বা কমিউনিটির পর্যায়ে আপনার কাছে আপনার কি বক্তব্য আছে, সুপারিশ কি আছে, আপনার বক্তব্য কি বলেন?
আমার বক্তব্য হচ্ছে কি বলে সাইকোলজি সেন্টারগুলো প্রত্যেকটা র্যাম্প সিঁড়ি নিশ্চিত করা এবং গর্ভবতী মহিলাদের জন্য একটু বিশেষ আরো ভালো ব্যবস্থা করা এবং আলাদা ওয়াশরুমের ব্যবস্থা করা এবং কোনো শিশু নারী নির্যাতন যেন হয়রানি না হয় সেজন্য বিশেষ করে আরো বিশেষ নজর দেওয়া এবং সচেতন করা এবং সচেতন সৃষ্টি করা এবং প্রত্যেকটা র্যাম্প বিশেষ করে যেন র্যাম্প সিঁড়ি থাকে সেটা নিশ্চিত করা।
আর কি বলেন?
আপৎকালীন তাদেরকে নেওয়ার জন্য একটা গাড়ি বা ভ্যানের ব্যবস্থা করা এবং ওইখানে আপৎকালীন যেন ওইখানে আসে বিভিন্ন জায়গা থেকে, সরকারি থেকে আসে, তারপরও যে একটা তহবিলের যদি কোনো ব্যবস্থা হতো তাৎক্ষণিক একটা আমরা ওখানে একটা তাদেরকে খাদ্য বা চিকিৎসা অনেক কিছু সেটা একটা তহবিলের মাধ্যমে সেটা গঠন করা, তহবিল গঠন করা।
যেটা ড্যানিস জিজ্ঞেস করেছে যে আমরা যখন প্রিপারেশন নিয়েছিলাম, হ্যাঁ আপনার সাথে যোগাযোগ করেছিলাম, তখন আমরা কিছু কোশ্চেন শেয়ার করেছিলাম, সেখানে কিছু আনসার ছিল, সেই অনুযায়ী ওই লাস্ট কোশ্চেনটা ধরেই ড্যানিস কোশ্চেন করেছিল যে ওখানে কিছু রিকমেন্ডেশন সাজেশন দিয়েছিল ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কমিউনিটি। শিল্পী আপা যেটা বলছে সেটা বাংলাদেশের প্রেসপেক্টে বলছে। আমরা ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কমিউনিটির কথা যদি ধরি, যেখানে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল এনজিও বা অন্য যারা আছে এই সেক্টরে কাজ করে, তাদের জন্য কি সাজেশন থাকবে সেই বিষয়ে কি আপনারা তখন কিছু চিন্তা করেছিলেন যেটা এখন বলতে চান?
যেমন ধরুন আপনার বলেন, আপনি যে আন্তর্জাতিক পর্যায়ে যে কোনো কয়েকটা বিষয় আছে এখানে আপনার মতো করে বলেন, যে প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষের কিছু সংকেত ব্যবস্থা এরকম কিছু, তারপরে এগুলো একটু বলেন ওদিকে, রেডিও টাওয়ার স্থাপন করা কিছু কথা ছিল।
আচ্ছা, হ্যাঁ আমরা অবশ্যই যে বিভিন্ন প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষ আছে তারা সিগন্যাল গুলো শুনতে পায় না, করতে পারে না, সেটার কোনো ব্যবস্থা করা, যেন প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষ এসে সিগন্যাল রেডিও টাওয়ার স্থাপন করা এবং প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষেরা যেন সেই সিগন্যাল গুলো বুঝতে পারে, জানতে পারে, সেগুলা নিশ্চিত করা।
কোথায় সেটা এই টাওয়ার কোথায় স্থাপন করতে?
টাওয়ার সেটা ইউনিয়নে বা ওয়ার্ডে বা যেখানে হোক, যেন প্রত্যেকটা মানুষ ও প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষ যেন সেই সংকেতটা শুনতে পায়।
Okay, thank you, Shilpi Abba. Basically, Shilpi Abba tell us developing disability-friendly signal system mechanism for speech and hearing and visually impaired persons. So it's a one point. And second point is to make a plan to place a radio frequency tower and so near Bay of Bengal to know weather forecast while the people sleep in the sea to catch fish, which are those to back to beach in save fishermen life from disasters. And third, she said to build a contingency fund structure for each UDMCs to use during disaster to make sure response to persons with disabilities and others, so elderly people, childs, etc.
Okay. So your recommendation, I heard that your recommendation is to invest in communication, really much in the flagging system that you mentioned, that this communication is accessible for everyone. Early warning, very good early warning when you're talking about weather forecasting, which is very important. And then the functioning of the committees during the disasters, that the committees can still be functioning during a disaster. So these are the 3 points which are very important for you and which you recommend to support to be supported by NGOs in general. I take this as a general recommendation, and thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your availability, for sharing your experience. We still do have your story in our training material that everyone can have a bit of background of your journey, of your life journey, your empowerment during the time, and your commitment to inclusive disaster management committee. So thank you very much. I will also share the written interview, which covers some additional questions with you, so that the participants can have all your experience and yes, your point of views. So thank you very much for your availability. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you very much all. Thank you very much all for joining with us, to giving opportunity to share our experience, and the coastal belt experience of coastal belt of Bangladesh experiences. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
সাক্ষাৎকার নেওয়ার জন্য, এখানে আসে ডাকার জন্য আমাকে ধন্যবাদ।
Shilpi also told us that thank you all also to giving me an opportunity to sharing my experience with you all globally.
Thank you. So we will continue with just the last information. So you have a slide which summarizes a bit what we have discussed based on the Gaibanda model. Self-help groups who work with government disability, which is considered in local and individual disaster plans. Schools that raise awareness, they pass the message, and that they host drills and sometimes as well provide shelter. Then not to forget resilient livelihoods, which need to be developed, and all this centered around strong self-help groups who can give their experience into mainstream disaster management committees wherever they are. I just want to highlight we are skipping the last slides because of the technical issues. I just want to highlight that the training material is still available for all of you on GoToTrainings. Please check out these guidelines. It's the YAS guidelines, it's the HIS guidelines, it's a website dedicated to Washington Group questions. It's Shilpi's background and the interview. The slides will be made available on the DRR platform, and please fill out the feedback form there, by following the link here. The link, I will post the link to the chat box as well. Sorry, I just yes, I will copy the link to the chat box. And I see some other comments. They are thanking for the webinar. They are thanking Shilpi for sharing her experience. Yes, so I'm wishing you all a very good day, very good evening wherever you are, and thank you very much for joining us. And again, please apologize to the technical inconvenience we had during the webinar, but yeah, unfortunately that's the reality. Yeah, thank you very much for joining. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Welcome, Monica. Rajesh. Okay, bye, Rajesh. It's a pleased to meet you.
Yes, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your inputs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're welcome. You're welcome. Stay safe, all.
Thank you.
Okay. May we leave from this webinar for today?
Yeah, we can still. So I will stop the recording now.